I'm going to do a run through. Everything that I'm saying now is something that you should be saying when you're running your sessions. So let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to try to follow the pattern that you'll be doing this week. First thing to do is, it's helpful to open the slide deck, and then you have, of course, your student leader tab where you have just the rough cadence for the day. I usually find it helpful to print this out ahead of time just so that I don't have to kind of keep on scanning for it. And then, of course, remember to take your attendance. So before the session starts, do these things. I've already done them here, and so I'll have them ready to show you. The first thing is you kind of welcome everybody. Right away, we're going to showcase the best projects from last week. And so remember, like, one of the things that we're trying to cultivate in this class is like this concept of excellence, and really trying to be a little bit competitive and a little bit fun about kind of encouraging each other to do better for your weekly projects. Here are some of the 3 top submissions from CCSF. This is a community college in San Francisco. And so we see this person, first of all, the thing that I check for is they spent almost an unreasonable number of hours, right? I'm not really expecting anybody to spend 26 hours on this homework, but at the same time, they did all the required, all the optionals, and they made up, some additional features. And so here's their kind of project submission. My favorite one was this one. This one was so extensive that he couldn't even fit it into a GIF. It was like a 60 megabyte GIF. So one thing that you notice is he pays particularly close attention to like the visual polish. You can see that everything here, I mean, it looks like an app that I might download from the App Store, in my opinion. I think it looks better than the Flickster app that's out there right now. And so, the network error is kind of really this really polished looking thing. And so one thing that we like to encourage students to do is, like, a lot of people will come into our class and say, hey, I'm actually more interested in just learning iOS. I'm not a designer. But here's the thing. In order to do apps like this, that's actually the most technically challenging areas of iOS, is to figure out how to make apps as polished as this. So you kind of have to push yourself a little bit. Like, look at the rounded corner here for the 7.32. Rounded corner is not a default setting on view properties. Then you have to go into the layer to set that corner radius. And so it's the pursuit of these little details that helps you investigate really the kind of the nitty gritty of iOS. And so you can kind of show your top submissions for your class and kind of give that shame spiel, right? Like, that you really want to push yourself. Like, look, you did kind of a blurring behind this photo of this banner here. So you really want to try to chase those things that you're seeing in other apps. See if you can clone them and bring them into your app. So that's the first part of the class. You'll spend some time demoing the top submissions from last week. And I want to ask you guys now, what were some of the challenges from last week, or what did you learn from last week? One way I like to put it is, if you could go back into a time machine a week prior and just give yourself kind of a quick heads up, what would that heads up have been? And I invite you guys to kind of answer that question. I know homework was completed a few weeks ago by you guys, but I'm just curious. Say if I were to pick on maybe the first row here, and that I have highlighted: William, Anisha, Hannah, and name. What were, if you could travel back in time a week, what's a pro tip that you would have given yourself that would have saved you time, that would have helped you explore more, something like that?
Something else, we were not able to check out the room beforehand, and so we realized that there's a VGA connection but not a HDMI. So we weren't able to show the students like exactly how to implement like these features, or like just start from the beginning by showing on our computers to them. So now that we have that connection, like, just check out the room beforehand. I would definitely have done that.
In terms of coding, one thing that I definitely wish I had done was, before just jumping in and trying to create the collection views, to go and look up more about what exactly it was and what was required, like what were the required functions in order to create a collection view, versus just trying to follow the steps that you guys had on the website or in looking things up on Google. I think it would have helped me a lot more if I had more background knowledge before just trying to jump in and make something.
I think just like compiling everything and making sure that your app runs like each step of the way. Because if you just like overlook it, sometimes it wouldn't compile, or like nothing would pop out. Like, I was having some navigation troubles because I wasn't connecting everything together right, and then that took a while to like debug everything.
I think that's an amazing tip. one thing that I try to hammer home every time, and it's, people tend to forget. They may write 50 lines of code before they hit run, but you want to be testing fairly frequently as part of your development process. Otherwise, it can get quite difficult to debug, and you also end up tricking yourself. You'll be chasing what are called red herrings, which are like problems that you think it's one thing, but it actually, like, you were screwed 10 steps before. So that's a great tip. Okay, so I think Hannah brings up a good point, which is, um, you know, about kind of reviewing some of the material ahead of time. So one thing that when you do this kind of retrospective with the class, things that you should listen for are, gosh, I spent 6 hours just struggling with collection view before I had this kind of aha moment or something. So remember that part of your role is that every week you have to remind people to kind of reach out for help. This is kind of a peer class, and it's a class that we have these mentors standing by for. By the way, if your mentor is not responsive or is just not helping you guys that much, let us know. Because we have a lot of mentors who kind of ping us and say, "Hey, I want to get involved," and I'm like, "Well, gosh, we're kind of full. We don't need anybody." Let us know if your mentors is not being responsive on Slack, or if their the times that they're online just don't seem to line up with the times that you guys need help. But the whole point of this class is that we're here to provide support, and for you guys to support each other. So make sure, if you hear people saying, "Oh, I spent 3 hours debugging this and we didn't work out," to tell them, well, why'd you do that? Make sure you're asking for help. Feel free to, during this time, kind of give them a heads up on this future week too. So right now you'll say, all right, well, this week we're going to show off this assignment. So this assignment is to investigate kind of like navigation in iOS. So not only do I have kind of what I have from last week, but now if I tap on any of these, I can do what's called a push navigation. Push navigation is the one where it kind of slides in from the right. You saw it go from the low res to the high res image, and as I scroll down, I can see more information about the movie. And I can also switch back and forth between these tabs to switch between now playing and top rated. So that this would be a great time for you guys to share your pro tips, because you did this a week before. So, I had a hard time realizing that, say, push and pop are two opposite things. So if I want to click on this, if I want to go back in code, it's called a pop, versus a modal. The reverse of that is a dismiss or something. So maybe that's an example of something that you didn't quite realize at first, but then you realize eventually. So share any tips that you had that you think might save them a little bit of time. Now, what you want to do is, like every week, there is a method to the madness, right? So what is the goal for this week? And the goal this week is how navigation works. And what navigation means is whenever you see another screen on the app, like how did it come into view, or how are multiple screens organized? And the really unintuitive thing, or the thing that surprises many people in iOS, is that primarily apps only use 3 styles of navigation. And intuitively you'd be like, oh gosh, that's it. I would assume there'd be many, many more. Even the designers in our class, so we teach a class for designers, even they're surprised when I say, look, it's only these 3, and they think about it and like, gosh, that it really is predominantly these 3. So these 3 are, the most common one is push. So push is kind of like browsing in Chrome or browsing in Safari. So it's very similar to web browsing. In other words, you click a link, you go to another page. You click a link, you go to another page. You click a link, you go to another page, and then you can go back, and browse through that history. So push navigation is all about this concept of building history. And it always comes with this animation of kind of coming in from the right and then leaving back to the left when you are animating. The second navigation style is modal navigation. Modal navigation is, on the web, it's something called a light box, which is something that comes up almost like I don't know if you guys ever had an ad pop up in a website that kind of takes over the screen momentarily. So it's something that comes up and then is dismissed. So it interrupts your current flow. So let's say if I want to do a compose here on LinkedIn, I'm interrupting what I'm currently doing. I'm composing something, and then I'm returning back to my existing flow. So one interesting question to ask yourself is like, when should I use push versus modal in general? And the third most common type is this tab navigation. So I think this one's obvious, right? Like the thing on the bottom that you switch between to switch between view controllers is the third common navigation type. Now, these are not the only navigation types. Can anyone kind of list any other navigation types that they may have seen? I'll kind of jumpstart you guys, get you thinking a little bit. Like, let's say that on Safari, mobile Safari, the actual app, when you have multiple pages, it kind of does this thing where each page, I don't even know how to describe it, kind of comes out of the screen almost in this perspective transform aspect, and so you can kind of switch between. It's how you switch between multiple tabs in mobile Safari. That's another navigation type.
Like for Facebook, like one of the side buttons like opens up to your friends and like different people that you can message.
That's right. Yeah. So that's called in iOS. That's called hamburger navigation. And hamburger navigation, there's this huge discussion about it this past year because people have loved it for a number of years, and now they hate it. So it's kind of one of those things that go in and out of style. So like WWDC, Apple said like, look, if we thought this was a good navigation type, we would have built it in by default, but we didn't. So that's called hamburger navigation. Still really popular in a lot of apps. So the hamburger navigation as well as the Safari thing that I mentioned, those are examples of custom navigation. They're not provided by iOS by default. We'll learn towards the end of this class how to make your own custom navigation. But I'll give you another example of one that's built in and is maybe the fourth on the list. Is if you're browsing like a photo album, it'll be full screen and you can kind of swipe and it'll go to the next photo. That's an example. That's called a page view controller. It's another example of navigation. So the bottom line is though, like if you I challenge you guys to after this call, open up apps in your phone and just start to break apart the navigation, and you'll realize that many of them are these three, but there are others. So the other goal that we have this week is working with scroll views. Believe it or not, scroll views are just maybe they're slightly unintuitive, and so it's the scroll view appears on the detail view of our project this week. And so that's it. That's our mission for this week. That's our kind of learning objective. And so we'll go into this pod discussion. So we went into some classroom and we noticed that these discussions they kind of went on a little bit it was a little bit unstructured. And so what we suggest that you guys do is just remind people that this is a 25-minute discussion. It just kind of makes people go a little bit quicker through it, a little bit kind of makes them keep on target a little bit. And so the discussion is, as always, it's going to be on the discussions tab here in the portal here. And so let's do a quick version of this discussion. We'll spend like max 10 minutes on this for us. So they'll be doing this in small groups. And so for us, like when would I use a collection view versus a table view?
I feel like table view would be good for people when they're posting things. Like people would just scroll down, like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter.
Yes, you're exactly right. So table view is fundamentally designed for vertical scrolling. So in fact, the key difference between a table view is that a table view it's a full row. Each cell has to be the full row. You can't have this situation where you have a cell next to another cell. That's unique to a collection view. But one thing that's different, one thing is that like a collection view doesn't have to be just an image. I can have many elements inside of a collection view cell, just like I can have many elements into a table view. So there's one more cool thing about collection views is that even though you happen to be using them in a grid, collection views are how you do anything that require arbitrary layout. So like let's say if I wanted to have a roulette wheel, like a roulette wheel style thing, you would use a collection view. So a collection view does not have to be a grid. The grid is just the default layout type. So let's go to the next question here. So the next question is, in this case where we're loading a lot of images in our app. So what are some strategies here to kind of improve the performance of loading images?
Well, for one, you could actually load the low resolution images first because they take lesser time to load than the high resolution images. And then, like we did, you could just blur the high resolution images in once they're loaded completely.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, especially since this is the era of Retina phones. Like Retina phones, especially the 6 pluses, they have gigantic resolution. These are like very, very large images. And so if there's a thumbnail view available to load that's a little smaller, that will, it's certainly one technique. Any other techniques involved in handling large image assets? Has anyone studied LRU yet in a class in school? Has anyone studied caching in school yet or heard of that term?
I think caching is essentially when the image is saved to the phone, like we did in this case. There's a difference when you load the image from the API, and then after you load it, when it's cached into your memory.
That's right. And so um, I think you guys should, one thing if you guys haven't heard of caching before, you should definitely look it up, and then maybe be prepared to chat about it in your discussion this week. Caching is, of course, a very common thing, right? It happens anytime you have something that's very, very fast, a very fast access memory space versus a very slow access memory space. So, for example, maybe you guys already know that RAM is very, very fast. And maybe you know that disk is slow, and network, of course, is even slower. If disk is slow, why not have everything just in memory? Wouldn't that just be better? Well, the thing is, like, my disk can store terabytes of data, whereas my memory can be 2 gigs, 4 gigs, whatever it is, right? So it's very limited space, but it's very, very fast. And so caching is all about making the data on that slow disk available to you, but I'm going to store parts of it into that fast area, so that if you ask for those parts and it happens to be in the fast memory, I'll retrieve it from there instead of going to that really slow access storage. So that's called caching. And the interesting discussion in caching is always like, well, which data do I keep inside of the fast memory versus what do I keep inside of the slow memory? And so those are called cache eviction techniques, like LRU. So the one that most commonly is used is the most recently used stuff is kept in your fast memory. So that's caching, and you want to, of course, leverage that system in iOS so that when I scroll this, it downloads it from the internet for the first time, but every time after that, it retrieves it from the cache if it's available. And if it's not available in the cache, it'll go to the network to fetch it again. So last week, of course, one of the things that we dove into was CocoaPods. Who wants to talk about what that is?
Yeah, so CocoaPods are basically your package managers. So your package managers, so it's kind of like pip with Python.
That's exactly right. It's pretty straightforward to understand. It's like any other, like many of the package management systems that you guys may have already used in other things, brew, pip. So it's just how you install libraries. And one thing that might come up is that there's 2 popular ones in iOS. One's called Carthage and one's called CocoaPods. So this is kind of a programming one. So what is a protocol? Why does one have protocols?
I'm not 100% sure, but what I think is, like, for example, in Java, you have interfaces. And when you have interfaces, you need to implement that interface, and then you need to put all the methods that interface has.
You're exactly correct. So a protocol is a synonym for a Java interface. They're the same thing. The only difference with a protocol is, unlike Java, you can designate some functions as optional, and you only need to implement the required ones. So that's a great analogy. And can anyone else tell me, like, why one uses an interface or a protocol?
I would say it gives you more modularity with the code, and that's why you would use one.
Okay, like more modularity. Can you expand on that a little bit?
So if you want to implement different tasks, you can use the same interface and build off of that, rather than creating a new class again and again and again.
Well, so what's the difference? When do you know when to subclass versus when to use a protocol then?
I'm not completely sure, but I would say, like, depending on the methods that are given to you in the interface, like, that's when you know I need a new class, or I can just feed off this interface.
Or another, I'll give you another example. So it's it's a follow-on to this final question. So what is the UI table view delegate? So UI table view delegate is a type of protocol, or is an example of a protocol or interface. So does anybody know what the UI table view delegate is?
So my thoughts on like the UI table view delegate is that like since table views are a very common element in Swift and iOS development, there's a very specific way that like Apple wants them to be implemented in order to like properly mesh with like the OS and everything like that. So the table view delegate is kind of like a way to properly control your table view so that it'll come out the way that you want it to come out.
Well, that's a great point. And then so like an Apple provides kind of they split up the protocol into two protocols. One's called a UI table view delegate and one's called a UI table view data source. How do you think they decided which methods went into the data source versus the delegate? Delegates are events. So all of the event methods, like the table view scrolled, or let's say I tap on a row, or let's say that I highlight a row, or let's say I unselect a row. These are all examples of events. So like, let's say that that swipe to delete for table view row support. So these are things that can happen to a table view, and then you might want to do something in response to it. And just kind of let me fine tune your language a little bit. You only use the word overriding when you're talking about subclassing. When you're talking about protocol methods, you talk about implementing the protocol methods. So the key to this is for protocols is that table view delegate, there's a little function that will be called did select row at index path. Does it work? Does it work if I just, let's say that I don't like that name and I call, I want to call did select movie instead, because I think that makes more sense for my app. Am I allowed to do that?
So if you want to do that, you basically have to do a hacky workaround where you make your own function that would basically call the function with the proper name, because since you're implementing that, if you rename it, then they'll have no way that knowing that you actually implemented it.
That's right. So like if I want to have a method called did select movie, I would still, what you're saying is I can't do it. I would still have to implement did select row to index path and inside of their call did select movie if I wanted to do that. And so I think Sanaya, are you the one that said that about making it more modular? Or someone up here said that it was about making things more modular. Or maybe was that you, Anisha?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, so that's exactly correct, right? So the thing is, it's about the rules with how one class interacts with another class. It has to go through a protocol of communication. In other words, what a protocol actually is it's the collection of methods. So the table view is going to call something called did select row to index path. And so before protocols existed, so for example, protocols do not exist in JavaScript. And that makes JavaScript a little bit more error prone, because I'm gonna implement a method called did select row to index path in JavaScript, but there's nothing that kind of enforces that that's the method name. And so I might accidentally call it did select movie or did select my row at index path, or maybe something slightly wrong. And in that case, that their class will not be able to communicate with my class. And so table view delegate is about guaranteeing that the classes know the methods that are going to be called, so that I don't accidentally implement another method. So protocols are often described as contracts between classes. So unlike subclassing, they do not provide actual implementation. It's more of just an understanding that these are the methods that I expect you to implement, and it's for me to know these are the methods that I'm expected to implement. And then the three types of navigation we've already covered pretty recently, so I won't discuss that. Does anyone have any questions? I think a lot of people are probably not going to be, because this is something that you'll get into a little bit later in your CS career if you haven't already covered this. This is definitely something you can certainly elaborate on or help guide when you bring people back into the discussions to discuss as a group. But does anybody have any questions? Does everybody feel prepared to kind of chat about that for the class?
Last week we talked about how the table view subclasses the sort of dumber scroll view. That's correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And then I was wondering if it would be a good time to talk about the idea how the table view delegate extends the scroll view delegate. And
Sure. So that's kind of a layering these concepts, because just like you might subclass a base class, the protocols themselves can subclass an existing protocol. In other words, they'll take a protocol that already exists and they'll add functions to it. So a table view is already a scroll view, right? If you have a table view, if you already so a scroll view has a delegate as well. It's called the UI scroll view delegate, and that has a family of methods in it. In fact, those are specifically the events that are related to scrolling itself. So the scroll started, the scroll stopped. And you guys know that if you flick a table view, it's going to keep on scrolling even after your finger lifts off of the screen, right? And so there's a method for understanding when the scroll view actually stops after you lifted your finger off. So there's an event for when you lift your finger off, and there's another event for when it actually stops. So you still have all of those methods available for you in the UI table view delegate, because the UI table view delegate is an extension of the UI scroll view delegate. In other words, it has all of those functions plus the ones that are specific to the table view. Any other questions from the group?
So
Yeah, go
instead
ahead.
of using like table view controller or collection view controller, like why do we use the view controller and then just add in those methods?
That's a great question. So you should always tell people never use the table view controller, never use the collection view controller. They're not used in real life. So the table view controller, it only does a very small number of things for you. It's almost pretty useless, right? So the things that it'll do for you is it automatically creates the table view for you, and it automatically sets itself to be the delegate and the data source of that table view. And then it will flash the scroll view indicator. It's just a visual thing. I don't know if you've noticed, it's quite subtle, but if you go onto a screen that has a scroll view, the indicators will flash momentarily. And that's all it does, really. So that's fine. I actually don't mind that it does that. I'm happy to use it. The only flaw in it is that it requires that the root view of the view controller is a table view or is a collection view. And when the root view of the table view, when the root view is the table view, that also means that table view cannot have any siblings. So very commonly, designers will give me mocks that really involve the table view having siblings. So for example, if I look at this modal navigation of this, this is the LinkedIn. Let's see here. So actually, that one doesn't show an example of that. But I don't know if you've ever seen things where there's floating buttons or floating elements. The only way to achieve that kind of floating nature is to have it be a sibling of the table view, so that it doesn't scroll with the table view. So if a designer handed me that, I wouldn't be able to implement it using a table view controller or a collection view controller. So I think it's just very restrictive without doing too much for me. All it saves me is maybe 3 or 4 lines of code. Okay, so if following your matrix, everyone will have had those discussions, and then you kind of bring the class back and you kind of rotate through each group and have them answer a question. Just you pick a random group and then you can kind of give them, this is your opportunity to kind of clear up any and redirect any of their answers.
During the pod discussions, when everybody's broken up into the groups of 3, I find that it's very helpful if you're the facilitator or the student leader to kind of circle around the different groups as they're discussing. You don't necessarily have to go in and directly interact, but just groups knowing that somebody's kind of coming around, listening, I think helps keep the focus. Because what I found when I observed a class is sometimes during that time, people want to kind of jump into other things that are on their mind, oh, hey, I had this problem with the app. Let's use this time to work on that. But that time will come right afterwards. So you're doing a little bit of a monitoring just so people know, hey, this is we have a structured discussion here, but also you're going to find groups that kind of run out of things to say for different reasons. And one good thing as a student leader or facilitator is to kind of go and sort of pollinate those discussions a little bit. So if it seems like a group has kind of started or stopped talking, maybe just prompt them with one of the questions, or kind of ask them, what they thought about this, or, insert a little bit of just something to kind of keep the discussion going. So I would be kind of rotating around, going through all the groups during that pod discussion, and that'll also give you a good idea of when it's time to go into the pod discussion wrap up. So if you're circling around, you may see that, maybe only after 20 minutes, everybody's really ready to go to the full group discussion. And so that'll give you kind of better insight to how that's going.
Cool. So that's it for the first session. And then the last 15 minutes, I want to talk about the lab session, which will be a little bit different this time. So the difference between the lab is that we're only going to work on the lab for the first hour of that structured lab. In the second hour, we're going to guide them through the group project aspect of this class, which I think is, one of the funnest aspects of this class, is it's your time to kind of take all of these things that we're practicing with and actually see if we can implement a really amazing group app. So the slide deck has a few more. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this. The pod discussion, to keep things focused at 25 minutes, we added this thing. You can put it up here and just play if you want. It's just a timer, just to kind of remind people. You can mute it when you're actually doing it, but there's a timer that actually can help people understand when the discussion is going to be finished. So the slide deck has something that you can use for the either your Wednesday/Thursday session, right? It's different for each university. And one example is things that you can go over when you're. And I think it's really inspiring. I think this one won the last demo day competition. So I'm not going to play this just yet, but basically it showcases something that people built in the class, like in this last semester. Actually, this was built. This is a really neat app. This was about remote collaboration of musicians. They overlay and compose these things kind of together. So it was really, really cool. I won't play these here, but you guys should play them on your own time, and then figure out a way to show them to the class. I think they're pretty inspiring. So the other thing that you do in this lab section is go ahead and open up the group project tab for the students, and just talk through some of the aspects of the group project. So if I look at the group project tab, So today we're going to be talking about brainstorming. And so it's really important that people choose an app that they actually want to see in the App Store. And so there's a number of ways that you kind of think about stories. And so you hear this word when you're in VC pitches a lot, or when you're in the Silicon Valley a lot. It's about the actual story. And what it means about a story is it's easy for apps just to have these random brainstorms. I heard some really silly brainstorms over the past few weeks, and those are fun, right? Those are really creative and neat. But a story is about how realistic is it? Is there actually a person who's going through the experience that you're describing? And so there's a word that's used with story called personas, which is, is it who actually has this particular problem? Are they a working person? What's their age group? And really, you try to almost envision this as a single unique person, a single person that actually has this particular case. So you can talk a little bit about the market, but this one's the most interesting to me, which is the habit. Sometimes people come up with amazing ideas. They're fantastic ideas, but they happen only once a month or once a year even. Sometimes people have oh gosh, the classic one is the birthday app. There's some kind of app to help you remember and do something and even buy a gift for your friends' birthdays. But how often does that happen in a given year? Just as many times as you have friends, right? And probably concentrated around certain like time windows. And so the problem with apps like that is that they're very, very hard to launch, because you have to train people. No matter what the app is, you have to train people on how to use them. So, for example, Facebook, Twitter, you might open these apps once a day, multiple times a day. And so those are the easiest apps to kind of build, because they if people aren't opening your app, you know that something fundamentally is wrong with your app. It's just not fundamentally interesting. If people aren't using your birthday app, you can't really tell, because it might be that their friend's birthday is just not coming up yet, right? So it's very, very difficult to see what kind of value you're adding. So habit-forming apps are easier to train, and also easier for you to iterate as a product. I'll also add one thing that's not listed here, which is this app interesting for even a single person or a small group of people? So one thing that's popular in the class is to build apps, but they only work if like there's a million people using it. It's like, oh, I'm gonna come up with the next Craigslist that's so much better than the really shitty existing Craigslist. Well, that's great, except like, where's your marketplace, right? Like, where are the things that you're actually selling? So I'll give you an example of something that someone built at Stanford in the last round, which I thought was really, really cool. So they belong to a fraternity. And they said, well, gosh, my fraternity does all of these things using all of these other tools, Snapchat, email, and to kind of stitch together the social interactions of our fraternity. So that group built an app that was specific to their fraternity. And it was a kind of a private network, almost like a private Facebook, except it was baked into this app. And so when they launched it, they were able to kind of pitch it to their own fraternity to use. But you can kind of like think ahead and realize that it's kind of like Slack, right? I mean, that team could have made that app for any number of fraternities to use for your fraternity only. So that's an example of an app that requires more than one user, but it has a reasonable launch plan in terms of, well, how do I bring in the initial groups onto this app? And so you can kind of review this for the students during the lab. Show maybe some of the highlights of the top example apps that were built in the last run. Talk about like how to think about these ideas, and their mission is to think of as many ideas as possible. We like to give them a concrete number. So in this session, think of 20 ideas that brainstorming style. In other words, don't kill silly ideas. Brainstorming is a time where every app is valid, right? And so you don't really kill ideas or tell people like why that idea won't work, but just come up with 20 ideas and just get it on a piece of paper. And we're going to add it to this project brainstorming spreadsheet. So this is a pretty fun aspect. It's kind of our kickoff to our group project stuff. Does anybody have any questions about the group project?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
So can the student leaders pair up with students in the class for the group project, or what's the situation on that?
Well, we had an initial thought on that, which is the student leaders would kind of make a group project together. But I mean, I'm open to being flexible on that. Charlie, do you have a thought?
Yeah. My personal thought is that groups should be made completely based on interest and rapport between group members. And it very well may be the case that because student leaders have been working together, that they will choose and feel most comfortable and be most inspired working with each other. But I think often that won't necessarily be the case. And there'll be somebody also in the class that's not a student leader that will want to make a group project with a student leader. And I would be behind that 100%.
Okay, awesome. So it was very helpful for you guys to send in your recordings. Not everyone was able to record their sessions last week, and so I just want to remind you to please see if you can find a way to record at least the first hour of your session, just so that we can. It's not really about evaluating you or what kind of job you're doing. It's more about like evaluating us almost in terms of like how good of a job are we doing preparing you to be running your sessions. It also give us some idea of like the class. So, okay, perfect. And so I just want to remind the student leaders again that, you're the one that's ultimately responsible for making this class awesome, partially because like we can't really see what's going on in the classrooms, right? You're the only ones that can kind of tell us what's going well and what's not going well. And so if you guys don't feel like things are going well, or things could be going better, please email Charlie, or do what you think is right, but also let us know too. Also, if your mentors are being not helpful or not available, please also let us know, and give us feedback for how you can be better connected to us or better connected to the mentors so that we can support you better. What I'm seeing right now is that some mentors seem to be pretty engaged on Slack, but maybe students are not finding Slack as a useful way, and they want a different way to kind of connect with their mentor. Slack is just too inconvenient, or some other kind of factor. So I would be interested in ideas of how to plug you guys with these mentors better, because they are fairly eager to help you. And like I said, you guys each have like 3 or 4 mentors that are, in some case, I think, just kind of like twiddling their thumbs. So I think if you guys have ideas of how to better engage them with the class, or leverage their knowledge, please do let us know. And definitely let Charlie know if you guys feel like your class is not being supported by us in some way. Cool. Other than that, I'll let you go on your Sunday. Thanks again for meeting us.